He is part of a generation of entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia, spearheading a wave of startups in the region, and in particular, the Philippines. Having been part of the early stages of Grab and Gojek, he has now trained his focus, attention, and expertise on helping Filipinos gain access to efficient transport and affordable food supply. With us in Thought Leaders, please welcome the co-founder of Byahe and SariSuki, Brian Koo. Good to see you again, Brian. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Cathy. It's good to be here.
And great to be back after, what, 7 years?
7 years.
Remember that time when we had that first long conversation and that was in a Grab,
Yes.
in a Grab cab, just roaming around the streets, in a bumpy road, talking about the relationship between disruption
Yes.
and regulation, or at least regulatory risk.
I do. That was the first and the last time I did that interview inside a car, inside a moving vehicle.
Indeed, and it was more challenging. This one is a little bit more relaxed right
Yes.
now, but in terms of regulatory risk, I mean, that still became a feature throughout your tenure
Yeah.
at Grab
Yep.
for the 7 years and 3 months that you'd been there.
Uh-huh.
Just looking back, I mean, how would you assess the kind of challenges that you faced?
I think when I was running Grab, the regulatory part became a lot more apparent when the Duterte administration came in. During the administration prior to that, the regulators were like, do whatever you want. That's not under our purview. But of course, we were small back then. But when the new administration came in, the President Duterte's administration, the head of LTFRB said, this is a growing thing. I think it needs to get regulated. So within the first few weeks, we got a suspension for acquiring new vehicles. And that continued throughout maybe half of the term until it was sorted out. So regulations became front and center, not just for Grab, but also for other ride-hailing companies around the world, as this was a sector that was challenging an existing regulated industry, but unregulated as of that time. So the way I saw regulations was, instead of treating it as a encumbrance, but rather treat it as part of the core strategy on how you should deal with regulators and use that chance to craft the rules that will be created for your industry. And I think we were able to successfully navigate through that very murky regulatory environment that we had to deal with during the growth of Grab.
How so, in particular, Brian? Because you're a disruption. So it's innovation that's never been, number one, regulated before. And here comes a regulator saying, hey, we've got you under our purview.
Yes.
What have you found in 7 years and 3 months that can work, that will work, if anybody else comes up with some kind of disruption like this?
Yeah. I think the basic tenet that everyone in innovation should understand is that a couple of things. One is that regulation will always follow innovation. Nothing gets regulated first and then innovation comes after. I believe regulators should give innovators space. I like what the BSP does with sandboxing certain types of functionalities that banks can offer, like digital banks, for instance, and things that they want to try. For it to flourish, to give it, breathe a little life into it before they decide what kind of regulations to put on it. So that's something that I think regulators have become more receptive to over the last 7 years. So innovation needs to be checked at certain points in its. I mean, just an example for Grab, right? If the regulators did not regulate how Grab priced its rides, you'd be seeing 5 times surge now, especially when a company like that wants us to profit take at a certain point. So it's good that there's regulation. I'd rather be in an industry that has a framework around it, as it allows you to know what bounds you have, and you're not always looking over your shoulder saying, am I going to be regulated tomorrow? Case in point, AI right now. There's a lot of talk, should AI get regulated? But then if you regulate it too early, it will stifle innovation. If you regulate it too late, it may already cause issues like, what if AI takes over a power grid because you given
And that's the fear. So do
that's
you think regulation should come in now for generative AI?
I think discussions around regulations have already been happening. I think it's going at a pace that is right for where the industry is right now. What I think there needs to be more of is a better understanding from the regulatory point of view of what AI can do and what parts of AI would need future regulation. But
Because eventually it will have an impact or influence in the startups that you're now doing post Grab. But let me first ask you about the reason why you left Grab. And that was at the height of the enhanced community quarantines
yes,
during COVID in August 2020.
correct. That was August 2020. Um, I felt that I've done enough within Grab. We've grown it to the main ride-hailing provider in the country. We've launched Grab Food, Grab Pay, Grab Express. I wanted to test my hand on something else. I had a lot of time to reflect during the early stages of the pandemic, and one thing that I realized for myself is that I probably have one or two good startups within me. And if I waited too long, I might not have the energy anymore. So I thought it was the right time to test my hand on something new.
And you're not alone. You have other alums, as they call it, the mafia,
Yeah.
according to Tech in Asia, ex-Grab, ex-Gojek mafia, or the former
Correct.
employees of these companies, these startups who have since set out on their own,
Yeah.
setting up their own regional startups. So where do you place yourself in that growing, broadening ecosystem in Southeast Asia?
Oh, I'm but a small peg in the whole machine. No? We do what we can. My focus is more Philippines. How do I create innovative, disruptive businesses that can help the everyday lives of Filipinos? Uh, I have no regional ambitions. I think there's enough to do here, um, and maybe once we've done enough here in the Philippines, then we'll look outside of the Philippines regionally. But at the moment, we have enough problems to fix just here in the Philippines.
But does that sort of mafia or the alumni provide you some kind of support, maybe financial
Yeah.
access? What benefits does it give a startup like yours, who started out not just in Grab and Gojek, but also Zalora?
Yeah. Other than I guess the learnings that you have while building those startups, and one needs to understand if you're part of a startup like Gojek, Grab, or even Zalora, Lazada, Shopee. These are what you call hyper growth startups. There's a term in startup world called blitz scaling, where you pour as much money into the ecosystem, but then grow as fast as you can, leaving every other competitor behind. And hopefully, by the time you get to scale, you can make money. It was a time that was practiced in low interest rate environments, like in the early mid 2000s, no? Where interest rates were practically zero, and funding was very abundant. In this last few years, funding has dried up for startups. Interest rates have gone up, so investors are now considering: do I go into a risky startup that can maybe give me a 20-25% IRR, or do I put it in treasury bills that assures me a 6% annual return? So it's become much more difficult, but we've learned a lot. We were fortunate enough to build during a time when it was an extreme. Startup founders who build today also learn different things. They're a bit more prudent in how they use up capital. They're a bit more introspective about the kind of ideas that they'll put out there in the market. For example, e-commerce, e-grocery, the markets that I'm in, that I've started building over the last 3 years, are not that attractive anymore to VCs. Uh, VCs are now all into AI, software as a service, things that can scale with relatively no cost. Um, so it's a different world, no? But what this network provides, it's support. One is the emotional support that you need as a founder, because the air is thin at the top. If you have no co-founders, which I fortunately have, but for founders that have co-founders without that same experience, it's very difficult to be able to share and to share to someone who understands what you're going through. So
And
this network provides a lot of that.
And build you have during a very unique time in our lives. Basically,
Yeah.
interest rates so much higher than when it was prior to the time that you started your first startup
Yes.
or were involved in one with Byahe.
Yes.
Now we're talking about something that's uniquely Filipino because this involves the ubiquitous jeepney.
Yes. Correct.
How did that idea come up to you? Is this an inspiration from Grab perhaps? Because it's also in the transport
Yeah.
sector,
It-
but
it-
basically in the public utility jeepney
Correct. It
industry.
was, no, it was. So when I was in Grab, I reckon we move around 350,000 people a day. Jeepneys, on the other hand, moves 30 million Filipinos a day, just as a network, of jeeps. There's around 250,000 of them all over the Philippines. It's the main mode of transport. It's the cheapest mode of transport here in the Philippines. But it is a sector that also causes a lot of problems. It causes a lot of problems with pollution. It causes a lot of problems with fair wage to the drivers. It causes a lot of problems with accidents because the jeeps are very old and not well maintained due to the lack of scale. And finally, it causes a lot of problems to traffic because of the economics of how jeepney drivers are compensated. So jeepney drivers are compensated with a boundary system, right? The boundary system means they pay a fixed rent to the operator and take home whatever else they make after expenses for the day. So what this does, it forces and influences jeepney drivers to wait at the corners. I'm sure everyone watching this program has experienced it, where you're honking at a jeep because he's waiting for passengers at the corner. Or if you're a jeepney passenger, you're riding in the jeep, waiting for the jeep to get filled. So you're waiting there for 15 minutes, just waiting for the jeep to get filled because the driver refuses to leave. So the new modernization that the government has laid out tries to eradicate all of these things. It will take away the boundary system because you're now salaried as a driver. It takes away the lack of scale because you're now managed by a fleet. It takes away the pollution for the air because it requires you to upgrade the vehicles. And lastly, takes care of traffic because you right size the number of jeeps on the road. So I like the program. When I heard about the program for jeepney modernization, what went through my mind was, I've been fighting the government for regulations around ride hailing. But with jeeps here, it's laid out. And I trust in this program. I believe in this program. All the points there, I agree with. I mean, I tweak certain things here and there, but generally, that's a framework. All I need to do is come in, be an operator, and help prove that it works and it will scale. That was the initial thought. So we started in 2020, then the government backpedaled and extended the deadline, and then extended the deadline again for consolidation, and then extended the deadline again.
Because of the pushbacks that
Because
the
of the
government
pushback.
was getting from transport
Yes.
groups like Manibela, Piston.
Yes,
So
that's right.
while regulators aren't your problem right now, at least not yet, you're finding that transport groups
Yes.
are not liking it. They want to maintain the boundary system
Yes.
rather than you shift it to the fleet
Correct.
management system, which other countries are doing.
Correct. An example for that is Singapore, right? Singapore started with how we are set up. This was back in the 1950s, 1960s. They were called mosquito routes. So small buses minding their own business, doing whatever they wanted in and around the city-state. And they realized you can't urbanize, you can't progress the city-state if you can't control like a large part of your transportation system. So the government started consolidating them into groups, and then later consolidating those groups into companies. And now these companies are listed. There's SBS Transport, there's SMRT, all of which are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, providing rides to millions of people inside Singapore. They've even used their technology and their systems to expand abroad. So some Singaporean companies operate buses in London. So it can be done. The government framework is there. I just wish that the political will can follow up what they've listed down in regulations. We're seeing that now, but execution on being able to eradicate colorum vehicles, which just puts passengers at risk, puts people who believed and invested in the system like us at risk. So they just pretty much need to execute what's written down.
There's a lot of views to that, not just from the transport groups who don't like the shift to the fleet management system. A UP study, in fact, did show that handing over the sector to huge corporations and profit interests would result from franchise consolidation.
Um, Franchise consolidation can result into that, but I am of the view that it should result into that. Uh, you don't displace people because individuals who currently participate in the jeepney economy will still be hired as drivers. But then a corporation has better financial wherewithal uh, and a more professional background into running a modern mass transport system rather than having 200,000 individuals individually running 250,000 jeepneys that do not have the capacity to maintain or upgrade these units.
So did we get
during
that
the
right? You're going to be hiring the jeepney drivers
Yes.
and make them employees of
Correct.
Byahe.
Correct. So a lot of the units that we run now are driven and operated by the jeepney drivers.
How many?
We barely run around 50 units.
In
We've
which
been
routes?
we have some in Quezon City, some in Manila, in Pampanga, and in Nueva Ecija. Yeah.
And how's that coming along so far in terms of what you said? It's better transport for the commuter, but what about fares? Is it any different? Is it any cheaper, more expensive?
Sure. The fares for modern Jeeps are around 2 pesos more expensive than traditional Jeeps. But then the comfort level is also different. So it's air-conditioned units that operate. It's also units that are more environmentally friendly. And these units don't break down in the middle of the road. The first few units we consolidated, Cathy, were registered in the 1970s. Imagine that. The old units, the traditional units, some of those units that people ride right now have been around since the 1970s. There's nowhere in the world that I can see that that's safe.
And they've been modernized into what? Euro 4 compliant ones
No. These are just
fully
the
electric?
traditional units that we want off the road and replaced with a more modern unit. And a modern
Which are
unit,
Euro 4 compliant?
which are Euro 4 compliant. The body follows the Philippine National Standard guidelines. Or electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are what we as a company are going for right now. We believe it's the future. It's a lot more economical when it comes to gas to gas savings and running the units. So the long-term prospects of the unit and running it in a sustainable way, both environmentally and financially, is better than running a diesel unit.
But what about the cost of turning that into a modern vehicle? How much did it cost, or does it cost? And what does it mean for the investment you have to do and the margins that you get out of it after you deduct the salary, amortization, maybe even maintenance? Because that's a big part of the whole ecosystem now.
Sure. So for electric units, the maintenance isn't as much as diesel units, fewer parts. The economics, the electric unit costs more than a Euro 4 unit, but then you save on gas and maintenance. The hurdle rate for a jeepney is around, I'd say, 6,000 pesos before you start making income. And that's achievable for most, if not all, of the routes in Metro Manila if we right-size the number of units on the road. A lot of people don't understand that there's an overpopulation of jeepneys. There's one route that we operate in. It's a 4-kilometer route, round trip. Imagine 4 kilometers. In the 4 kilometers, there are 20 jeepneys, traditional jeepneys, running the route. So that's 5 jeeps per kilometer, which means every 200 there's a jeep. Obviously, there will be congestion if all of them are fighting for the passengers. And obviously, those jeeps will not make money because there's a limited set of passengers, but there are 20 units. Why are there 20 units? I don't know. It was all the franchising regulations, in the past, decades ago, that just gave out all these franchises to these units.
So would right sizing mean some jeepney drivers losing their jobs?
It'd be reallocating the jeepney drivers. Where would you reallocate the jeepney drivers? You'd reallocate them into a different route, or you'd put one jeep, two drivers, to be able to cover 20 hours of, of going around the route. We're trying to minimize the loss of employment for drivers, for those that lose their other opportunities. The government has done a good job in creating scholarship programs for drivers that might lose employment or might be impacted by the shift to a more modern transport ecosystem. And even ourselves, right? You can be a mechanic, you can be some drivers have those sets of skills.
And what about the salary? Is it attractive enough for the kind of earnings they take in a boundary system?
The salary is higher than minimum wage. And on a per day basis, you may make more with a boundary system. That's what you call your jackpot day. But because you're driving a unit that's 40 years old, it only runs 3 times a week or 4 times a week. So your overall salary will be smaller than if you're salaried. Plus you get overtime, plus you get all the government benefits, plus you get security of tenure. So all of these things just add up, that allow an individual to earn more as a salaried employee rather than an individual operator na what we call kapit sa patalim every day when they go out.
So the 50 jeepney drivers that you've now hired, how are you able to convince them to actually join you up at Byahe?
So at the start, it was hard. But once they saw that being a salaried driver, they take home more at the end of the day, then it becomes easier to hire. And also, we give the ATM card to the wife. So the wife can now control the expenses.
Is that right? For every one of them. So that's
For
part
mo-
of the
for most of
benefit.
them. That's something that we learned in Grab also. When we did a promo, when we wanted to get drivers, we give all sorts of incentives, cash incentives, but we still kept losing drivers. So we came up with a program called Grab Rice. So if they hit a certain number of rides, we would give them rice. The driver couldn't gamble away the rice or couldn't get rice to buy alcohol, right? So he'd bring home the rice, and then the wife would be, where did the rice come from? Say, oh, I got it from driving for Grab. Then the wife would be, starting tomorrow, you drive for Grab every day.
It's the wife's the boss there.
The wife's the boss. Even in my household, the wife's the boss.
I'm gonna go back to fares because that's so important. I know you said it's 2 pesos lang, but it matters for the commuter out there who does the commutes on a daily basis. How are we going to get to the point where riding Byahe would be cheaper than what we have there on a boundary system?
I think we need to be in an all or nothing phase. We can't be, let's mix up traditional jeeps who are not consolidated, not following the rules in Byahe. Why? If I think modernization is fully implemented in the country, we would save money on traffic. If we save money on traffic, the people who take the jeeps may be paying 2 pesos more, but they're getting 2 hours back in their time, in their lives. The 2 hours back is worth way more than the additional 4 pesos that they would pay back and forth. They could spend it with their kids, which is priceless. They could do a TikTok live or, live selling or enter into another business, be a SariSuki reseller, and earn much more than 2 pesos. So we may be charging more as regulated by the government, but we're giving back so much more because what we're giving back is something that they can never earn back.
So can I take it then it's going to take time for you to lower the cost and maybe make it as cost competitive or even less?
I'm going to say something pretty controversial. I think jeepney prices in itself are too low. They're too low for us to be able to maintain a proper transport ecosystem. Just like MRT prices, I think they're too low also. So they need to go up because if we don't, we're always going to be in a vicious cycle of we don't have enough money to maintain the vehicle. And it causes breakdowns. Having disruption in a service will cost the ecosystem, the environment, the companies, the employees, the individuals, a lot more than what it would cost them to pay a bit more for transport.
Well,
So I am not a big believer in reducing the cost. I'm a big believer in having the right cost that allows a service to operate without disruption.
I've got some values here coming from Piston. It's a claim that they made that commuters are going to be hit with a fare hike of at least 20 pesos.
I don't believe that. That's too much.
So between 0 and 90?
No, I think 14 pesos, which is what's being charged by modern jeeps, is the right this is the right amount right now. You can make it work with electric vehicles. In fact, I think 12 pesos can be economically viable for a modern jeepney operator, provided that all the traditional jeeps that are not consolidated are taken off the road, and provided the right number of jeeps for the demand on the road is what's placed on the route.
So many dependencies there, but
There are.
Ibon Foundation has come up with another estimate: fares to go up to 50 pesos within 5 years because of the quote-unquote corporatized setup of the modernization program.
I don't believe in that. Why? Because the government regulates our prices. It's not like the jeeps could say, "Oh, I want to charge 50 pesos today." It goes through a very tedious process of raising prices. Just like how toll roads, the fees on toll roads cannot just be hiked any day of the week. It goes through a tedious process on what are the interest rates, this and that. So the government is there to protect what pricing any of these regulated entities are able to offer. But then, again, it's actually one of the differences that we were able to do when we were discussing regulations with the regulators, was for them to understand the economics on the other side. Because it can't be just for the passengers. The economics on the other side of those that provide the service to the passengers need to be correct. If it's not correct, then no one's going to invest. If no one invests, then we're going to have a really crappy transportation system forever. Right? So we need the investment to come in.
So what's not crappy in terms of margins then? Because again, and I referred to tech in Asia, there was a mention of at least 50% of a margin.
50% margins.
50% margins after you reach 10,000 jeepneys and a potential revenue of about $300 million US dollars.
The revenue potential is there.
That
with the
much.
50%
So that's
margins,
confirmed.
If you reach 10,000, if you work out the numbers, it could be. The
And you have that target of 10,000 jeepneys?
We do have that target, but
What's
we're
your
very far
timeline?
from it.
How far are you from it?
Very, very far. Maybe we're 20 years away from it. But the jeepney in the industry in the Philippines is around the $1 to $1.5 billion revenue market. It's a big market, just like any other form of transport that provides the main mode of transport for commuters could be a big market. 50%, that's probably before amortization, could be before amortization, but those numbers were projected under the current fare guidelines. So we didn't project those numbers and said, "Oh, let's charge 50 pesos," because it's unrealistic. I cannot control the fares. I can request for higher fares. I cannot control the fares. But again, at 14 pesos, I believe that it's economical. Should the government just follow and execute what it's already laid out in the regulations and memos that they've put out.
But right now, the Supreme Court's got in the game. They've asked for more details from the regulators themselves in the hope that they could get some more details on the progress of this consolidation. How is that impacting your own timelines at Byahe?
It's delaying them. It's delaying our timelines. It's delaying the interest of foreign investors to invest in our country. And frankly, I believe that this is a setback for progress for our country. And I hope that they can sort it out at the regulator level and we can continue executing in the best way that we could.
But you've got interest hanging in there. Petro Pacific Tollways invested and is now the biggest minority stakeholder in Byahe since 2022.
Correct.
So that kind of financing, what is it doing so far in the 2 years that you've had them as partners?
It's allowed us to add more units, but the partnership, I believe, is also more strategic. They provide a lot of expertise in transport, in managing large-scale companies, a different perspective than what a startup would be doing. So we're very happy with the partnership, and then we're looking to add on other partners who are more focused also on climate change, as we want to expand our fleet with electric vehicles more than diesel vehicles.
Okay, well, from Byahe to SariSuki, as your brand name there and your nice orange shirt suggests, 7 months on, you went into the fresh food business.
Yes.
So how did that come up, and why again after 7 months? We are still in that pandemic
Yes.
sort of scenario when everybody was still working from home.
Yep. It started with my wife selling fresh produce, mainly imported produce, to her neighbors, to our neighbors.
Was this along the lines of the community pantries?
It
if
was
you
along the
remember?
lines of
I
community
see.
pantry,
Okay.
but it wasn't free. Like I think community pantry gave it out for free. She made a little nice home-based business out of it. And just like any good entrepreneur, I saw it, copied it, and stole her idea.
What did you tell her? I could take that business.
Yeah, I could take that business and scale it, and we can feed a lot of people. Um, but I've already had an interest in agriculture ever since I was in Grab. I was trying to launch a product called Grab Rice. Back then, I even met with Senator Villar to try to understand the intricacies of agriculture and farming. And the more I understood it, the more I liked it. I liked it from a perspective of it has a lot of issues and there's a lot of problems to solve. And I will never get bored because every single day there's a new problem to solve.
So what did you learn from the pandemic lockdowns? I mean, we discovered just how broken our whole food supply chain was with all the empty grocery shelves that we remember from way back.
Fortunately or unfortunately, I've already known how broken it was ever since. I did a project for a different government when I was a consultant that looked into agriculture supply chain, and the problem of the middleman persists not just in the Philippines, and uh, and I think that's something that needs to be solved if we want to get produce into the hands of the consumers in a better way. And the way I see agriculture, I listen to the AM radio every morning, and the three things that always get brought up is transport, gas prices going up, traffic here. There's always some issue about transport, agriculture, and energy. So agriculture is always prices going up, El Nino, La Nina, farmers getting affected, rice prices doing this or that, and then energy is the last one, brownouts and this. And those are three basic things that an economy needs to progress and improve on. I've done transport. I'm still doing transport. I can't do anything in energy. It's just beyond me. I don't understand it. So I settled agriculture. Um, and the more I got into agriculture, the more I understood what makes it interesting. It makes it interesting from a human perspective, the lives of farmers. How do you help improve them? And it's very, very basic things. There's huge opaqueness in information that goes back and forth from the farm to the market. Um, there is a lack of access to the markets that are controlled by the middlemen. And in the and the huge problem of wastage along the chain. 40% of what we produce is wasted along the chain just because we don't have the proper infrastructure. And the result is consumers are paying more for what they should be paying less for, and they're getting lower quality than what they should be getting good quality for. So it's a nice problem to fix because there's problems in operations, there's problems in marketing, there's problems in community, there's problems in finance. So as an entrepreneur that likes fixing problems, I will never run out of
So
them.
where are you going to start? I mean, you just mentioned this has been a problem from way back, even before the pandemic. You knew where the supply chain was broken.
Yep.
So what's going to be game-changing with SariSuki?
We started with the demand side. So how do we solve the demand side? We created a network of community leaders. We have around 3,000 of them right now who can get produce into the community. So this stems off from what my wife was doing. So for you, Cathy, for example, you can sell into your neighborhood fresh produce that allow you to sell it at a lower cost and allow you to make a small income based on what you sell. From there, we've now gone to the other extreme of the value chain. We're now working with farmers, trying to get them to plant uh, based on the demand that we have, so we can do a contract buy with them, and they could not. They won't have to worry about who's procuring their produce. And then the other things that we're doing is looking for ways to help them improve their yield. So the yield of the Philippines on a per hectare basis for vegetables is around 30% lower than what it is in Vietnam, for example. In rice, we already see this. And the wastage along the supply chain is also pretty high because we don't have the proper infrastructure. And lastly, the cost for us to plant is also twice of what it costs in a Vietnam or a Thailand because we don't implement the right capex at the farm level. So what our aim is within the next few years is to influence the farm level growing to lower cost, improve yields, and put up post-harvest and post-processing facilities. So instead of vegetables being harvested and left in the fields because there's no shade, there's no proper infrastructure, it goes into a post-harvest facility where cold washing is done, proper sorting, proper grading, and packing in the right materials is done. So when it's shipped to Manila, wastage is kept at the minimum. There are two things that affect the produce once it's shipped out: wastage and shrinkage. People don't think about shrinkage. Shrinkage is how much water loss happens as you transport. And for something as simple as sayote, you could lose 30% of the weight within 2 days if it's not handled properly. 30% losses is 30% losses for the trader. That's why traders put in a huge patong in the
Margin.
prices, in the margin, the markup that they put on those products. Because every time it changes hands, you're considering how much shrinkage will I have, how much wastage will I have, all because we lack the proper infrastructure.
So if and when the president says, and he did on May 24th, emphasize the need to overhaul the country's supply chain, then that must have been good news to you because he made a mention of improving and reducing transport costs for farm to market roads, agricultural ports, and improving cold storage facilities.
Yes.
So I'm thinking now, you've got Byahe and you've got your SariSuki going. In what way might government intervention, or at least facilitation, help startups like what you're now involved get to solve the problems of both transport and getting us fresh produce and affordable groceries?
I've had the fortune of being able to speak to the DA and
Department of Agriculture
correct.
Secretary.
Yes, and when the plans were discussed, what they want to do, I fully support what they want to do. It's very in line with what we want to achieve as a company, and having them provide infrastructure, support the farmers, helps accelerate what we want. We'll figure out where we can add value. I would be, I guess, a follower to them in what they implement. If they implement the thick main pipeline of how agriculture will flow, then we will use technology to see how we can add value at the different steps. One simple thing is, for instance, what would you say is the largest digital agriculture marketplace in the country today?
I've got one in mind. Starts with the letter C.
Which one?
Cropital?
Not really. It's
No.
Facebook.
Oh,
Facebook is the largest agricultural marketplace.
is it? But how come it's not so out there?
It's not, because it's all done by private selling. If you go into Facebook and you type Ampalaya farmers, you'll come up with an Ampalaya group with hundreds, thousands of followers where people sell the produce. They'll take a picture of produce saying, I have this much tons of Ampalaya for sale, and people DMing, how much? Because people don't know what's available and at how much it is available at. That's something we're looking to disrupt. That opaqueness of information gives traders all the power. Traders will then dictate the price. Traders will then dictate when it's going to be harvested, when it's going to be picked up. And as a farmer, because I have no access to the market, I'm desperate. I'll sell it to you at a very low price because I don't want it to go bad and lose my whole harvest. Right? So all of that creates misaligned incentives along the chain. So if we can make information a lot more transparent, where a farmer could just send a text message, say, Ampalaya prices today. He gets the prices at different levels of the network. What is it in Balintawak? What is it in the Talipapa, in the community wet market, and what it is in the supermarket? Then he'll be able to decide.
And that transparency is something that people will get and farmers will get in SariSuki's app.
Not in
Is
the
that how
app.
it
We're
works?
building a farmer partner app in which we want to expose the transparency.
So it's only available to farmers,
Yes,
which they need so that they could get ahead of how much
correct.
they can price their produce.
Correct, correct.
And benefit also consumers. Presumably, it'll be lower than what the
Yes.
middleman proposes.
What we want to do, the problem is not there's one middleman that makes a lot. The problem here is that there's a lot of middlemen that make a little. So if you add all that up, there's a there's a messy middle. That's what we call it. There's a messy middle in the center of that whole value chain. So if we can skip that messy middle and provide what value, I'm not saying they don't have a value add. Maybe half of them have a value add. They value add in transport, they value add in market matching, they value add in financing. So if we can take the functions of the middle, consolidate and organize it at the top, then I think we can solve the agricultural problem.
All right, and I see that you've already had 2 rounds of funding
Yes.
worth $24.8 million US with 9 institutional investors.
That's right.
And you were just saying there's a bit of a dearth of investors, but you've got it going for SariSuki.
We
What-
got
what
this
are the
before
plans?
the interest rate.
The interest rates went
interest
up.
rates went up.
But have the plans changed, the timelines? Could you tell us more about those plans? Because that's a whole ecosystem that you're trying to fix right now with all the gaps in
Yep.
between.
You will need a lot more than what we raise to be able to fix agriculture in the country. So what we've been doing is we've been doing pilot tests with model farms. And what we want to prove is really just one or two things. One is that we could get yield better. We could improve yields by just using more modern agricultural techniques, which involve just planning of the use of fertilizers and pesticides, and using drip irrigation instead of the furrow irrigation that is most common in the vegetable farms here. So it's a more direct way of irrigating plants. Second is that we can lower the cost of production. If I can show that I improve yield by 20-30% and lower cost by 20-30%, I immediately cut down costs per kilo by half. That's savings, because then now we transport it directly to the markets and cut out that messy middle, translates into savings for the end consumer.
Have you given yourself a personal timeline for that? In translating to those metrics, really huge numbers.
We've done it with one model farm. Unfortunately, it was the first test. The yield at the start was really good, and then we got rained out. So we're now doing it again, another execution. So hopefully, I'd be able to update you in 6 months.
And I'm
if
sure
we're
your
able to
kids will
prove
know
that.
about it before I do. As the kids
I
have really
hope
been
so.
plugged
I
in,
hope so.
still asking you apparently about why you left Grab. But
Yes.
in living in a startup environment, what's it like being dad and showing them the way that they can solve big problems that the world will need next?
It's not easy. They're still very busy with Roblox, and
Which they should be at this
They should
age.
be.
I think they're just about less than,
my eldest is 11.
younger than 11, yeah.
So they're still at that Roblox, I just want to read and stay home phase. But every time I get the chance, every once a year I bring them to the market. So we have an annual trip. I show them the market so they can understand how prices are inside a wet market. And then they'll also understand how prices are inside the supermarket, and they'll see the prices that we're able to get it from. So teach them the basics of what margins are, how to enable supply chains in a better way, is where I'm starting off with them. Then eventually, they've been to some community leader events with us as well. So they've met some of our resellers. And just exposing them bit by bit, and not forcing them to do it, I think is the approach that I'm taking.
Do they know what bootstrapping means?
Good question. I don't think they do.
Daddy always being on a
funding.
budget,
Yeah.
but not when you're on holiday,
Yes.
as I'm sure you always have fun when you do. Well, I thank you so much for this opportunity. I wish you well in all your startups. We've started from Grab, and who knows what next. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
and good
Cathy.
luck.
Thank you.
And catch us again next Thursday at 9 p.m. Philippine Standard Time on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. I'm Cathy Yang, and this is Thought Leaders.